Hello and welcome to Nikolai's genetics lessons, and today I got a problem from one of my subscribers. Here is a problem. You find 3 trees where each tree gives a different colored fruit, red, pink or orange. You perform crosses between all 3 trees and get the following results. And here the results of the crosses, of the 3 crosses, red and pink, red and orange, pink and orange. So now we have 2 questions. Are any of the plants true breeding? How many different alleles for fruit color exist within these 3 trees? As usual, I recommend you to pause video here, try to solve this problem on your own first, and when your brain starts to boil, you may run video again and you would see the solution of this problem. So, first of all, there are 3 different variants of the dominance in simple Mendelian genetics. The first variant would be, for example, when we have simple dominance, and we have, as you see, 4 colors here. So we have red, pink, orange and pale yellow. So our first assumption would be that we have 4 alleles here, and for example one allele would be allele A1, A2, A3 and A4. And for example, allele A1 would be dominant over the allele A2, A2 would be dominant over the allele A3, and allele A3 would be dominant over the allele A4. So you may try this idea, but this was my first also assumption. I spent about 3-4 minutes before I have found that this doesn't work. So this was example of simple dominance. And also in simple Mendelian genetics we have 2 more variants. One would be codominance. For example, when we have 2 alleles, I would show you example with 2 alleles. For example, allele capital A and capital A prime. These 2 alleles can produce 3 genotypes in diploid organism. Dominant A, so homozygous, heterozygous, dominant A and A prime, and another homozygous A prime, A prime. For example, dominant allele A would produce red color, and it's not recessive. Another dominant allele A prime would produce white color or white pigment in flowers, for example. So genotype here would produce red flowered plants. Genotype that is A prime would produce white flowered plants, and genotype that is A and A prime would produce plants with flowers that would have patches of red and white. So let me draw once again. This is going to be a plant that is going to look like this. So it would have patches of red, and it also would have patches of white. So there is no mixture here. So this is just going to be patches of clear color here. This is example of the codominance. And the last variant would be incomplete dominance. And here would be another example. So once again we have alleles that is capital A and small a. So one would be dominant, another would be recessive, but this time this is not going to be simple dominance, this is going to be incomplete dominance. Once again, these 2 alleles in diploid organism can produce 3 genotypes. One would be capital A, another one would be capital A, small a, and the last one would be small a, small a. If dominant allele would code for the red pigment, if recessive allele would make white pigment, what we are going to see in three possible genotypes. Here we would see red flowered plant. Here we would see white flowered plant, and heterozygous genotype would produce intermediate color, so color between red and white. So once again, if I would draw a picture of the flower, it's going to be pink. So as you see, this is going to be intermediate color between white and red. So red would be incompletely dominant over the white. Basically, what white allele means. This means that this allele is so mutated that it doesn't produce any pigment at all. So in heterozygous genotype, what we would see that one allele produces red pigment, another allele doesn't produce any pigment at all, and pink color is basically diluted red color. So we would see red pigment produced here, but the quantity would be greatly reduced. That's why we have transition from red color to pink color here. And when we have two recessive alleles, flower would be of the white color, but it doesn't mean that recessive allele produce white pigment. It basically doesn't produce any pigment at all, but we perceive it as white color. So one more time, I want to go over three main ideas of the simple dominance, codominance, and incomplete dominance. As you see, if we have two alleles in, for example, codominance, we would see three genotypes. If we also have two alleles in incomplete dominance, we would see three phenotypes. So that means we need more alleles, more than two. I already said that I tested this idea. It doesn't work. You may also test this idea if you want, and I encourage you to do it so you would have better understanding of genetics. And I can cross out this variant because intermediate, we don't have intermediate color here. When we have two codominant alleles, we would see patches, and according to our problem, so patches of pure color, according to our problem, as you see, we don't have any such variants here, so all colors are pure. So let me now clean the space, and let me once again introduce you another conceptual idea. And this time I want to go over ABO blood group system. You may ask why I am going to go over ABO blood group system while our problem about different pigments of the plants, and you would see the connection in just couple minutes. So in the ABO blood group system we have three alleles, and the three alleles are allele A, allele B, and allele O. So this is why we call this ABO blood group system. How many genotypes and phenotypes these three alleles can produce? So first of all, I want to tell you that allele A and B are codominant, and both alleles A and B would be dominant over the allele O. So allele O would be recessive to both allele B and A. So how many phenotypes and genotypes we can see in the ABO blood group system? Phenotype A, so blood group A, can be made by two genotypes, A and AO. Blood group B can be made also by two genotypes. One would be B and BO. Blood group AB can be made by only one genotype, AB. And blood group O can be made only also by one genotype, that is OO. So as you see, we have 1, two and two phenotypes here, and this is going to be codominance here. So this is going to be third phenotype, and blood group O represent fourth phenotype. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 phenotypes that is made by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different genotypes, and we have 3 alleles here. Once again, allele A and B are codominant. That's why we have blood group AB. But if we would have incomplete dominance, blood group AB wouldn't be like white and green. Instead, we would have some sort of intermediate phenotype, so it would be light green color. So basically, this completely describes what we see here. And now let me use different colors and Punnett squares to show what's going on in each cross. But once again, ABO blood group system has almost exact description of the relationship between these alleles, except that here we have codominant two alleles, but in order to solve this problem, I would choose that two alleles would be incompletely dominant, so would produce intermediate phenotype. One more time, let me clean a space here. So imagine that this time we also have three alleles, and our alleles would be allele A1, A2, and allele which would be recessive allele A. Now let's assume that allele A1 would produce pink pigment, and allele A2 would produce orange pigment, and recessive allele A would produce red pigment. So now let's see what may happen if we would cross red and pink. So in order for a plant to be red, it has to have two recessive alleles. So the genotype have to be small a, small a. In this case, phenotype would be red. And we have to cross with the pink one, and pink is dominant over the recessive allele A. If I would also take two dominant alleles A1, all the progeny would be also pink. So I would say that genotype of the pink plant would be dominant allele A1 and recessive allele A. So this genotype would produce pink phenotype because this dominant allele A1 would be dominant over the recessive allele A. So let's now build a Punnett square, and let's see what we can expect in F1 generation. Dominant allele A1 here and recessive allele A, two recessive alleles here, dominant allele A1 and recessive allele, and two recessive alleles here. So as you see, results of such a cross would be 50% of the progeny that would have red color, and another 50% of the progeny would have pink color, just like their parents. So let me use a thick color, thick lines here. So this is exactly what we see here when we cross red and pink. 50% of the progeny, which we call F1, would be red, and another 50% would be pink. Let's now analyze second line when we cross red and orange. This is P stands for the parents. So parents one had red phenotype, another one orange, and in F1 generation we got 50% red and 50% orange. Once again, we know that red color is recessive to both these alleles, so in order for the plant to be red, it has to have two recessive alleles. So we know that genotype of the red plant would be, once again, small a, and if orange color, which is allele A2, if plant would be homozygous, so would have A2 allele, so you can imagine A2 here, so 100% of the progeny would be A2 and recessive allele A. So 100% of the progeny would be orange, would have orange color. So we have to assume that orange would be heterozygous. So genotype of the orange would be A2 and small a genotype. So would be heterozygous, and when we build a Punnett square, once again, let's see what happens. What would happen to the progeny, what genotypes and phenotypes we can see in their progeny. So in the first cell we would see A2 and small a here, A2 and small a here, and small a here. Once again, according to this Punnett square, 50% of the progeny would have red pigment, and another 50% of the progeny would have orange pigment, just like this parent here and this parent here. So let's check. When we cross red with orange, result of such a cross was 50% red in the progeny and 50% orange. So far so good. We checked this, and it works. But what would happen if we would cross pink and orange? And this is what we got. So let's analyze what happened here. Pink phenotype and genotype is here. It is A1 and recessive allele A, and phenotype and genotype of the orange would be A2 and recessive allele A. Once again, we build a Punnett square, and now we would be able to see results of such a cross. So once again, on the side we have a parent that is phenotypically pink and heterozygous. On top we have a parent that is orange and also would be heterozygous. And let's see what kind of progeny they can produce. So A1 and A2 here, A1 and small a here, A2 and small a here, and small a here. As you remember, small a genotype would produce red colored plants. So plants with red pigment. And genotype that is A2 and recessive allele A, which is here, produce orange color. So we would have orange color here. And genotype A1 and recessive allele A, which is here, as you see, would produce pink phenotype. And now we have a new genotype that we didn't see before. And according to our problem, results of such a cross would be 1/4 red, 1/4 pink, 1/4 orange, and 1/4 pale yellow. So as you see, we have a new color here. So when A1 allele is incompletely dominant over A2, we would see a new color if genotype would be A1, A2, which is going to be intermediate. So we have incomplete dominance here. So the color of this genotype would be pale yellow. And this is exactly what we see here. So our explanation meets all the requirements of this problem. And now let's check our answers. Are any of the plants are true breeding? How many different alleles for fruit color exist within these 3 trees? We already gave an answer to the second question. There are 3 alleles that can produce 4 different colors depending on the combinations of these alleles, and 2 of the alleles would be incompletely dominant and would be at the same time dominant over the recessive allele A. And the first question, if any of the plants are true breeding? Yes, red colored plant is true breeding, so has 2 recessive alleles, and all the rest genotypes would be combinations of different alleles or would be heterozygous. So what true breeding means? True breeding means if we would cross this phenotype with this phenotype, that 100% of their progeny would also have the same phenotype. Is it possible that, for example, plants that are pink also can be true breeding? Yes, of course, it is possible. The genotype would be A1, A1. But in our example, we know that genotype is A1 and small a allele. Is it possible that plant that is orange also would be true breeding? Yes, it is possible if the genotype would be A2 and A2. So if we would cross genotype that is A2, A2 with another genotype that is A2, A2, of course 100% of the progeny also would be A2, A2, and we would call true breeding. But as you see, this phenotype also can be made by another genotype that is A2 and small recessive allele. So this is going to be orange, and this is going to be pink. And the last one only can be made by a single genotype that is small a, small a. So this would produce red pigment. So we have 3 alleles, and we have 4 phenotypes, and these phenotypes would be produced by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 6th one would be variant where we have incomplete dominance A1 and A2. So this is going to be yellow phenotype. So we have, as you see, 3 alleles can produce 4 phenotypes and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 genotypes. This is exactly the picture that we see in the ABO blood group system, with only difference that in ABO blood group system we have codominance of the 2 dominant alleles, and in this example we can explain what we can see here when we assume that allele A1 and A2 would be incompletely dominant and allele A would be recessive to both allele A2 and A1. And this is all for today. Thank you for your attention. Please subscribe for my new videos that I post almost every day. Thumbs up if you like this video. Please write your comments, questions if you have any. And see you in the next video. Goodbye.